Welcome to Better Together. Today, I'm going to be working with Daniel from LaunchDarkly, and we're going to be presenting Atlassian Open DevOps and LaunchDarkly. And we're going to talk about how you can accelerate the feature velocity of your development by using the tools together. So we have a really simple agenda today. We're going to be doing quick speaker introductions. Then we're going to do an introduction to Atlassian Open DevOps. Then Daniel's going to take over and do an introduction to LaunchDarkly. Then we're going to walk through kind of an integrated demo of how Atlassian and LaunchDarkly works together. And then we're going to talk about why feature management should be in your toolchain at all, like what the value proposition is for teams. So as far as speakers, I'll start off. My name is Warren Maruziak. I'm a technical evangelist with Atlassian. I've been at Atlassian for a couple of years, and I kind of focus on developing stuff and building out demos and talking about our tools.
Hi, I'm Dan O'Brien. I've been at LaunchDarkly for just over 3 years now, and I work with partners around building product integrations and also with partners around building integrated demos like we're going to go through today.
So to start off with, we're going to take a quick look at Atlassian's Open DevOps offering. So Atlassian Open DevOps is more than a set of technologies. It's kind of an idea. And the idea is that we don't think a one solution fits all model makes a lot of sense. Every team has different needs and different requirements, different skill sets and different education levels and different levels of comfort with tools. So instead of providing a single piece of technology that tries to solve all problems, Atlassian Open DevOps looks to make it very easy to integrate your favorite tools from the open market. So by default, Atlassian Open DevOps comes with a core collection of tools, which is enough to get you started in DevOps. That provides core functionality and is sufficient for a team to do development work and get code out to production. Those tools are Jira Software, Bitbucket, Opsgenie, and Confluence. And what I'm going to do now is jump into just a quick introduction to each of those tools and talk a little bit about them. So the first tool we're going to talk about is Jira Software. Many people should be familiar with this, but Jira Software is kind of the hub that everything bolts onto, and it's kind of the source of truth for work in a team. In Jira Software, you create backlogs full of Jira issues with work you want to do. You assign people to them. You can move them through various statuses. You can connect to your source control and other tools to have data from those tools flow into Jira Software. And it lets people understand the state of work across their teams in a single place. There are ways of doing management reporting out of here, so you can roll up data, you can divide your work as many ways as you want. We offer a lot of flexibility in terms of how you lay out your work and control it. Now, one of the new features that we've been working on inside Jira Software is something called Release Hub. And one of the things we realize is that when you look at a Jira Kanban board, you might have hundreds of Jira issues on that Kanban board. You can arrange them into sprints if you want. But with the sheer volume of work that could be in a particular Kanban board, it can be really hard to understand where along in a development process a particular feature or set of features is. So Release Hub is this idea that a user can take many Jira issues and assign them to a release, and then you can track that very specific subset of work in the release rather than in the Jira Kanban board. And we provide like a progress bar at the top to show you where along you are, what's been completed, what's in progress. And you can see in the screenshot, we've got a small subset of Jira issues and all of the statuses of them. And this will update as you do work across them. So users can kind of understand and hyper-focus on delivering specific features kind of quickly, rather than having to look at a Kanban board where there might be an overwhelming amount of data. Next tool in this list is going to be Bitbucket. Bitbucket is our source control management tool. Bitbucket's Git-based. You can create repositories and do all of the stuff that would be expected of a source control management tool. Bitbucket also comes with Bitbucket Pipelines, which is Atlassian CI/CD tool. You can use Atlassian Bitbucket Pipelines to basically deploy your software to wherever you need to do. It's all YAML controlled, so you build your pipelines as source code in your repository, and you have a lot of flexibility there. Another tool we have is Opsgenie. This tool allows you to send your alerts to a specific location. As your monitoring picks up problems, as your logs have problems show up in them, you can raise alerts in Opsgenie, and you can set up on-call teams and on-call rotations to kind of take care of these alerts as they come. It's fully integrated with Jira. So if you see an alert show up and you want to have somebody do some work on it, you can create a JIRA for that particular alert, and just kind of gives you a really solid starting point for running ops. We also have Confluence, which is a collaboration tool. Confluence lets you collaborate on design docs, documentation. It integrates with a bunch of things. So if you want to have Figma diagrams in here, for instance, or other diagramming tools, you can do that. So it just gives the team a nice place to build out documentation and other things related to a project. Now, we talked about Atlassian being this starting point for DevOps where you can connect a whole bunch of other tools. To do that, you're going to go to the Atlassian marketplace and search for integrations for your tools. Many third-party vendors build integrations for us. So if you want to find, say, a LaunchDarkly integration, you can come in here, search for LaunchDarkly, and then there'll be an integration you can just install. We have integrations for many, many tools. So if you wanted to, say, replace Bitbucket with GitHub, that's a thing that can be done. If you wanted to add GitLab as another alternative, you can definitely come in here and do that. If you wanted to add Circle CI or New Relic integrations, those also exist. So basically any product in the open market that your team wants to use, you can probably find an integration that's already been built for it, and it's available here, and it's installing is a couple quick clicks. Now, some teams have integration or tools that they like that don't have existing integrations. Maybe your tool is not widely popular, or is a smaller tool, or just hasn't partnered with Atlassian yet, or maybe it's a homegrown tool where you've written that on your team and it's essential to the work you do. If you want to build an integration for it, and you can do that with the Atlassian REST APIs and Forge. So you're fully empowered to create your own integrations and ship data both into Atlassian products and out of Atlassian products. So Atlassian Developer offers you an absolute ton of flexibility. Now I'm going to hand this over to Daniel, and Daniel's going to give us a quick introduction of LaunchDarkly and walk us through kind of the LaunchDarkly offerings.
LaunchDarkly is the leading feature management solution in the space. It helps teams transform how they really deliver software. So it's not just about the feature flag at the code level, it's all the way through releasing the software. What this means is you can handle your release management at scale. So across all the teams in the organization, you can release those features in a very consistent way. And for teams that have products out there, but they want to start experimenting more, with LaunchDarkly feature flagging and experimentation, you can now take sections of the application and actually run experiments to see what the impact of those changes are. So you can be data-driven based on the KPIs that are important to your company. And the third piece we'll talk about for LaunchDarkly is app modernization. Many companies have software that's been out there for 5 or 10 years that modernizing it is risky. You can spend months making modernization effort and it can still fail. With LaunchDarkly, you can wrap those changes in feature flags and help de-risk that process. So without LaunchDarkly on the left-hand side, you'll see what can happen as you're releasing the software. So you can have a release that goes out there and is available to all of your end users at once. And if it contains a bug, all those users are exposed to it. Where with LaunchDarkly, you can do more of a controlled rollout. So you can roll it out to a certain percentage of users at a time and validate in the production environment that everything is working as expected before it's released for everyone else. Then we work with a number of companies that do what is called big batch releases. You'll have 5 or 10 teams working on each one of their features for weeks and months, and then they go to do a release. And if one thing goes wrong, everyone has to pull all of their releases back. With LaunchDarkly, you can wrap each one of those features in a feature flag and really separate out each of the teams. So if one feature has a problem, rather than rolling everything back, you just disable that feature and all the rest of them are already out there for your users. And then the third piece is migrating from the cloud or migrating to the cloud. So if you have on-prem software and you want to move over to the cloud, you can do it in a controlled fashion. You could even route a certain percentage of your traffic over to the cloud before enabling everything. LaunchDarkly has SDKs in pretty much every major language. At this point, we are over 25 different SDKs, and we even have SDKs in languages such as Roku and Haskell. We also look to integrate throughout your workflow. So as Warren was mentioning with the open DevOps toolchain, we really look at feature management as being one part of your overall tool chain. So we work with tooling such as Bitbucket. In LaunchDarkly, you can run a Bitbucket pipeline that will find all the feature flag references in your entire code base. So you get a single pane of glass, you can see them in the application. And also with Jira, as you'll be saying, we can tie those features together. These are just two examples of our overall integration throughout all the different tool chains. Today, we're going to be taking a look in the daily life of a developer, from receiving their Jira ticket to work on an item through releasing that feature out into production when it's no longer in their hands.
Okay, I'm gonna take off on this and get started with Jira. So a developer in our view typically starts their day by picking up a Jira issue and getting to work on it. One of the things that we see with Jira is that you could have potentially hundreds of Jira issues in this board. So if you want to get a more laser focused view on that, one of the things you can do is move the specific subset of work you want to work on into Release Hub and set up a release that only works or deals with the specific features that you want to focus on. So first thing we're going to take a look at is how to set up a release. To enable Release Hub, you're going to go into Features, and then you're going to move over to Releases, and you're going to toggle that flag on. Once you've enabled that, you're going to see a Releases panel show up in the left-hand nav bar. From here, you can click Create Version to create a release. And a release basically has a name, and it has a start and an end date and description. And you can see that this release is on release because we haven't done anything with it yet. Now, if we were to click into that release, we can see that we don't have any Jira issues assigned to this yet, but there is this related work section. Related work lets you tie together links to various things that are important to this release. So if you're working on a couple of features, this is where you would link up your Confluence pages that have your designs for those features. You would link up your feature flagging pages like LaunchDarkly. You could link up, say, New Relic dashboards, basically whatever you want. So you can aggregate all the information related to this particular release in one place. That way, any developers that are assigned to work on this release can find all the relevant information for this release in one place. They don't have to go to the Jira board to click around to find the Jira issues that are related to this. They don't have to search through Confluence for the documentation. We can put it all in one place, and it basically saves everybody a lot of time hunting around various tools to find the things they need. Now, to add a Jira issue to a release, what you can do is open the Jira issue up, and you're going to look for the fixed version section in the right-hand details panel. So you pop open the dropdown, and you're going to see all of the releases that are related or available to you. So we're going to pick a Release Hub demo for some work in this backlog. And when you do that, if we come back to the overview page, we can now see that the progress bar is populated. It turns out that a couple of these issues are done. Those are indicated in green. A few of the issues are work in progress. Somebody's already working on them. Those are in blue. And there's a bunch of issues that haven't been started. Those are indicated in gray. We drill in, we can get a more detailed look at this. So we can see that we've got 8 or 10 Jira issues assigned to this particular release. They're all assigned to me at this point in time. And the status of them is either in progress, to do, or done. And one of the cool things is we've got this feature flags section on the right-hand side. So from within Release Hub, it's quite easy to click in here and either attach to existing feature flags or dive into your feature flagging tool of choice to create new feature flags. So if we click Add Flag, we can see that we can create a flag in LaunchDarkly. And if we click that, that's going to drop us into LaunchDarkly, where we can start to set up feature flags to deploy to our environments. For this demo, the application that we're deploying is something called Image Labeler. Image Labeler is an application deployed to AWS. It has 5 or 6 Lambdas. It has some AWS infrastructure like S3 buckets, DynamoDB tables, and it uses a little bit of SageMaker. And we deploy to multiple environments. We have test and staging environments, and we have multiple production environments. So Daniel's going to walk us through kind of how to set up LaunchDarkly to handle that scenario.
So once you click over from Release Hub into LaunchDarkly, you would normally jump into that flag, but we're going to take a step back and look at how that's modeled in LaunchDarkly. So in LaunchDarkly, there's this concept of projects and environments. A project is a set of feature flags and a set of environments. A feature flag can be on or off in any one of those environments, and we'll generally see our customers will model their environments more so after the infrastructure layout, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But you can generally think of it as your lower environments and your higher environments, which are your production environments. Jumping into the Create Feature Flag menu, you give your feature flag a name, and this just is a friendly name so you can identify it. Then you use a key. So the key is what's actually used in your code base, and this is unique for the entire project. Then for each feature flag, you have the option where you can give it a description, which is what is the feature flag used for and why, along with some tags to make it to make filtering easier for it. Then for any feature flag, you have the option of selecting the client-side availability. So by default, all feature flags are available to our server-side SDKs, but you can also optionally make them available to either mobile SDKs or your client-side SDKs, which you can think of as like your JavaScript SDKs and your single user context. Continuing on with this menu, when you get to the flag variation section, we actually support multiple types of flag variations. We have a Boolean flag, which is your true and false, is this feature on or off. Then we also have support for strings, numbers, and even JSON objects. For a string, a lot of times we'll see a customer wanting to create a message banner, for instance, that they want to show to certain customers at a time. So you can contain that message in the string itself. For number feature flags, we have customers that will control things like batch size process using that number, or should an alert fire somewhere based on a feature flag return value. Then we also have support for those JSON objects, and that's where you can do a small bit of targeted configuration that each variation is unique. And once you go ahead and create that feature flag, as I was just saying a minute ago, it exists across all the environments. So this is really important to know that even though it exists across all those environments, it won't be on until you turn it on in those other environments. So here we're looking at the example of the submit image feature. It's off in our production environment, but it's on in the other environments such as staging. This really helps you separate that deploy from release. So you can deploy it through all those environments, but then you have the ability to test in each one. So for example, in a lot of lower environments like dev and test, we'll see developers turn the feature on just for themselves. So they'll do individual targeting to turn that feature on in that environment. Then as it progresses through to production, they'll take a more standardized approach to it.
Okay, so at this point, our developer has gone into Jira, created a release for the work they're going to do, moved a bunch of Jira issues into that release, and created some feature flags for one of the changes they're going to make. So once the developer has made that feature flag and is ready to go, they can go to the code tab in Jira software. And from here, you can see all of the repositories associated with this project. Now, in this screenshot, we see all of the Bitbucket repositories associated with this. If you were also using GitHub or GitLab, you could see those repositories in here as well, and they would function the same way. So from here, you can click on Bitbucket, say submit image, to go to the submit image repository in Bitbucket. And once you jump over to Bitbucket, as is usual, we're going to grab our clone URL, and we're going to clone this repository down to our workstation. Once the repository is closed to our workstation, we're going to create a branch. The branch is going to be named after the Jira issue we're working on. This is important for the integrations to work. So if you're working on a Jira issue like IM222, you're going to want to have IM222 in the branch name. It doesn't have to be the whole branch name, but it needs to be in there so that the integration can correlate this work with that Jira issue. Anyways, we pop in, we make a quick change to our code, and then we're going to go out to Git, and we're going to do our standard Git process. We're going to git add, git commit, and git push. When we do a commit, we also want to add our Jira issue ID to the commit message. So if we're again working on Jira issue IM222, you want to throw that into the commit message again, so that the integration between source control and Jira can keep track of that work and link things together for you. So at this point, developers made a change, developer has committed and pushed up to a feature branch in Bitbucket. At this point, we can go to Bitbucket and we can take a look at pipelines. The Bitbucket pipeline for our feature branch will have kicked off. And the structure of this pipeline is fully controlled by a file called bitbucketpipelines.yaml. It's a very flexible configuration. You can basically create steps to do anything you want. You can run raw bash scripts, you can interact with Docker, you can deploy, you can run tests, etc. So it's very flexible. And you have fine-grained control about what kind of things can trigger each step. So this particular pipeline is set up to trigger on push to a non-mainline branch. So because we pushed IM223, we kicked off the, I guess, dev version of the pipeline. And as we can see, this pipeline has a few steps. First thing it does, it runs some unit tests. Then it's going to run sneak tests to do some security scanning. Assuming that passed, we're going to deploy to our test and staging environments. And after each deployment, we're going to run a set of integration tests to make sure that we haven't broken anything. So by the time this pipeline has finished running, we'll have deployed our changes to our test and staging environments, and we'll have run unit tests, integration tests, and security scans across it. If you wanted to do other things like code linting, that's completely possible. You can have a ton of steps in here to make sure that the code is up to quality. Now, if we jump back into Bitbucket and take a look at our kind of source screen, we can see in the bottom right corner here that we've got a pipeline that ran for IM223. This is basically just a nice way of getting back and forth to the pipeline and seeing the last chunk of work that was run for this pipeline. You can click on this link and it'll take you directly back to the Bitbucket pipeline screen. But where this is really useful is if you've integrated with something like GitHub or Circle CI, this will still be populated by the integration, and you'll be able to click on the link here and go directly to the Circle CI pipeline that ran. So instead of having to hunt around different tools, you have links that take you directly to the thing you want to do. Now, once you've finished deploying to dev and staging environments, you can create a pull request to start the deployment process for production. So to do that, you go to pull request, click create pull request, and you want to choose your source branch. So in this case, we've chose IM223. And once you've created the pull request, you can assign people to approve it and go through your standard pull request approval process. So maybe you have a peer developer review it, maybe your manager looks at it, and maybe a senior engineer looks at it. That's up to your team. It's very flexible that way. Once it's been approved and merged, you're going to kick off your production deployment pipeline. Typically, this is going to look a little bit different. In our case here, we don't do any unit testing or sneak testing at this point. Those tests have already been run and proven to work. Now all we want to do is deploy our change to our production environments and run integration tests to make sure that we haven't broken anything at this point. You could do more here if you wanted to. Again, Bitbucket Pipelines is very flexible. You have a lot of options, but for this scenario, we've got a really straightforward pipeline that just deploys and integration tests. Now, once that's finished, you've finished your deployment to production. The developer can kind of move on to doing work on their next Jira issue. They're kind of done. However, there is a development panel in each Jira issue that the integrations have been populating with data. So if you look on the right-hand side here under the details or development panel, and you can see that there's commits, pull requests, and builds. If you click in there, it'll take you to the development panel, and there's a bunch of tabs across the top. Branches shows you all the branches that were created and the status of them. So we can see here that the submit image repository had a branch IM223, and there was a pull request for it, and that was merged. If the pull request hadn't been created and merged, there's a button to create a pull request here. So you can drive your work from this screen as well. And all of these links take you to the spots you would think they would take you to inside of the various tools. If we look at commits, you can see all of the commits that were made as part of the development process. So this is populated when you put the Jira issue ID in the commit message. And that's why that was important, is so that we can roll all this work up together and kind of see the progress of it. You can also see your pull requests. So in this case, we've got a single merge pull request, who the author was, and what the title is. You can click into these links to go directly to the pull request. You also see builds. Builds show you kind of the build step that ran and whether it completed successfully. And in the deployments view, we can see the deployment status of our change. So in this case, we've deployed to test and staging, and we've also deployed successfully to 2 of our 3 production environments, and we are in progress deploying to our 3rd production environment. You can click on any of these links to go directly to the spots in Bitbucket that would make sense to show this information off. And if you're deploying to another environment like, or using another tool like GitHub or Circle CI, you can click on those things and jump into those tools directly. And finally, we've got a feature flags tab in here. So what we can see is that we have one feature flag that's been associated with this issue. This is work we did earlier when we were in the release hub and we added a feature flag. This shows that there is a feature flag and the feature flag is connected. That's what status on means. That doesn't mean that the feature flag is set on. It just means that there is a feature flag associated with this Jira issue. And then we can see that there is, at this point in time, when this screenshot was taken, a single rule attached to this feature flag. There may be more. Now, the really cool thing about this development panel is that it lets the developer kind of provide updates to, say, leadership or management about how the work is going, but they don't actually have to type anything in Jira, and they don't have to go back to Jira at all to do that work. The developer can stay heads down and just do their work. And the only requirements for them is to have the branch names and commit messages labeled correctly. At that point, all of this is auto-populated. and they're able to just stay heads down on their work. Finally, we're going to take a quick look at how Release Hub gets updated. So earlier when we looked at this, we didn't see the development builds or deployments columns. We just had our Jira issues. But in this case, we can see that IM223 is almost finished. The PR has been merged, the builds are successful, the deployments to production have completed. And once the third deployment to production in the region that was in progress finishes, the IM223 Jira issue should flip to done. Now, from here, we've deployed across 3 environments, but we haven't enabled our software in 3 environments. We still have to go and configure our feature flags for production deployment. And I'm going to hand this off to Daniel now to take a look at kind of how to set up LaunchDarkly for production deployments.
So as Warren was mentioning, with the flag off and the code rolled out, it's now in a state where the developer can hand it off if they wanted to, or they can set up the workflow to actually enable that in the production environment. So this enables the development teams to move as fast as they want deploying the code, but it's still off in production, so there's no risk of it being enabled there. So here you can see that the feature flag is turned off under targeting, and under default rule, even if we turned it on, it will be set to serve the false value. If we go ahead and click on the Workflows tab, we come to a page that has a list of all the existing workflows for this flag. Currently, none are configured. So let's go ahead and click on Create a Workflow. And we're presented with 4 options here. The first option is a template. So in your organization, you can create repeatable release workflows in the production environments that any of your teams can leverage, so you know it's being done in the same consistent way across all these teams. But we also offer some right out of the box for you, that being progressive rollout. So you can enable this flag to turn on a certain percentage in any space you want. So you could have it turned on slightly more percentage every 10 minutes, or you could turn it on every day, have it increase in percentage wise. The third one is a maintenance window. This turns a flag on for a certain amount of time and then turns it off. So if you have planned maintenance, you can actually take the site down, do any of the maintenance you need, and then have that flag turned off when you're ready. The one we're going to be looking at today, though, is a custom workflow. This is where you can build a workflow that fits your specific needs, and then you would have the option to actually go ahead and save that as a template. When you click on Create Custom Workflow, you're presented with this screen where you can give the workflow a name. You can add a description for this workflow. It's also comprised of multiple stages. And your first option is you go ahead and create an approval request, which we'll talk about in just a moment, or you can schedule this to automatically take effect at a certain time. If you click on approval request, you can create a description for why this approval request happens, and then you can select specific members or different teams. We like to call this the GitHub style pull request review, where you can have someone go in and look at the changes before actually approving them. Then this is taking a look at that entire workflow. So after we've gone ahead and requested someone for that approval step, we've now built out the rest of the workflow, where the first step we're going to take is to actually turn the flag to on. Then as part of that step for turning it to on, we're enabling it in US East 1 for that environment. So as Warren was mentioning, there's 3 different production environments as far as the infrastructure goes. But to LaunchDarkly in this case, we're looking at it all as the LaunchDarkly production environment, and we're using the feature flag targeting to do this in a limited way. So in the LaunchDarkly SDK, you would pass in a custom attribute called environment with that name to it, and that's how you can perform the targeting there. So the first step will be turning this flag on in that US East 1. Then 1 day later, we're going to go ahead and enable it in US West 2. So this lets you do that scheduled rollout that your team can go in and verify in each region before it's actually continuing to roll out. And then the final part of the rollout is enabling it in CA Central 1. Once it's created, you'll see this at the top of the feature flag targeting page. And this first step is showing that approval request. So when the workflow gets created and the approval request along with it, it will actually ping that team member via email, or we have a Slack integration that they can view it right in Slack and approve it from there. Let's take a look at what that approval screen looks like. So the approval screen will tell you what's getting updated. In this case, the targeting is turned to on. And we're adding a specific rule here. So as part of the approval process, multiple people can come in and add comments as to why they want to approve or not allow this change to go through. So you can kind of get that audit log of the changes, and you can see who requested the change, and then who are the current notified reviewers. Anyone that has the correct permissions to allow this, though, could come in and approve it also. Once that's been approved, the rollout actually begins. And from this perspective, the developer no longer needs to be hands on the keyboard at all. We already scheduled everything out automatically. So it's just going to continue the progress on until it's rolled out entirely. But in this case, it's step 1 where we've enabled it for US East 1. And then a day later, it would be the additional region. And with that, you can enable it for all of the production instances without having to toggle it yourself manually. Why feature management in a DevOps toolchain? Every development team deploying code today is already doing a type of feature management, whether they realize it or not. That is, they're conditionally controlling code through config files, homegrown solutions, or environment variables. That's the reason the question is a why and not a should you. What we think of as feature management is an up-leveling of what teams are already doing. There's 2 components that teams should consider with a feature management solution and what it enables that all teams are looking to solve for at the end of the day. The first is safety. And there's 2 specific types of safety we'll be talking about: psychological and technical. Google showed that top performing teams get that way not because of 10x developers, but because people feel safe in their team, which includes some key points for this discussion. Psychologically safe people feel like it's not the end of the world if they're imperfect, need to ask a question, don't understand, or make a mistake. This scales from the individual to the team and to the entire company. A good manager can do their best to build a safe environment for a team, but if the company is going to fire people for outages, then it's not actually a safe place. With feature management, you can build better practices around releasing software to your end users. This translates into getting rid of weekend and overnight releases, which increase developer burnout and the stress associated with a release going wrong. With technical safety, mitigate your risk by reducing how many people are exposed to a possible problem. Increase your safety by failing forward, by making fail forward and fallbacks fast and seamless. Instead of having to roll back a whole release, you can turn off just the part that wasn't working, so you can roll forward, not back. And that brings us to the next point: speed. But speed builds on safety. You cannot move fast until you can move safe. Teams run into it over and over again. If there's a problem with one release, more steps and process and verification get added to the next release, slowing things down. Fast is continually integrating code and testing it and maybe deploying it. It's not waiting for long release cycles or major revisions, at least internally. There are good reasons why external changes can be more complicated. You may need to work across departments or across companies to get everyone aligned. But for the engineering team, they can already be moving on to the next project. Fast is the best way for us to iterate on changes when they're still small and easy to correct. If you make a small change, there's less chance of it going wrong enough to break something. Making your deployments small and granular means that even if you lose a bet about it being ready, it's not a big deal. It enables the ability to do course corrections. You just want to nudge the wheel a bit. No sudden jerks unless there's an emergency. Now, let's dive a little deeper into what I mean for the engineer. At the code level, organized feature management is an enabler. Deployments can now be separated out from their branching strategy. This decreases the risk of merge conflicts and increases velocity. We've worked with teams to get rid of multiple long-lived branches where developers were responsible for cherry-picking specific commits across the branches. It was an error-prone process. That team is now able to confidently merge more often with a collapsed branching structure and have that new code behind a feature flag, knowing that until that flag is turned on, the code path isn't in use. You can safely refactor your code behind a feature flag. That 1,000-line function that no developer is really confident in how it works can now be broken down into multiple smaller functions, each individually tested and verified that they're working as expected in your running environment. Now, don't get me wrong. Unit tests are great, and you should still have all of your normal test coverage. We're talking about adding on additional safety here. Your team can now implement code patterns such as a strangler, where you're taking a piece of a monolith and creating a new cloud-native service for it. With feature flags, you don't have to do an all or nothing cutover.
Deployments can now be happening nonstop throughout the week as code is completed. The more often your deployment pipeline is used, the more reliable it is. If you're only deploying once a month or even once a quarter, you're going to encounter issues every single time. But if you're deploying multiple times a day, you know that when you go to click the button, or if the deployment process is automatically kicked off from a merge, that it's going to work. Then a release you can think of as enabling specific functionality for users via feature flags. With LaunchDarkly, that means turning on a feature flag, and there can be scopes to the release. Those scopes minimize the blast radius. So you can enable it just for your internal users, or you can make it available for a percentage of users overall. When you have confidence in the feature and the business needs are met, then you can fully roll the feature out to all users. The point I want to make is feature flags are not forcing a pattern, they're enabling your team to implement the safest and best patterns for them. Thank you.